Right, I'm going to give you a little introduction to Phil, who's a detectorist and a PAS, Portable Antiquities Scheme, self-recorder. Phil has been detecting for 30 years, working the fields alone and supporting archaeological investigations. He's a self-recorder with almost 3,000 records on the Portable Antiquities Scheme database. Phil retired from the Environment Agency in 2016 after a 40-year career as a freshwater ecologist and environmental manager. His experience of environmental monitoring and scientific detection has shaped a passion for archaeology, with accurate details captured for every record to create a sound resource for research. So, and with that, I shall hand over to Phil.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the Society for asking me to talk tonight. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I'll be reflecting on those 30 years odd as a detectorist, mostly in Leicestershire, and hopefully trying to shine a bit of a light on the sort of insights that recorded metal detecting data can bring. My name causes issues from time to time when I'm giving talks, especially in archaeological circles. A year or two ago, I gave a talk locally for the Festival of Archaeology, and a part of the audience were actually quite nonplussed because they were expecting a totally different Phil Harding. I have actually met Phil Harding from Time Team. There he is on the left to avoid any confusion. I'm on the top right of your screen, and that's also me on the right of that picture. I met Phil Harding from Time Team when I was lucky enough to be asked to be the detectorist on the Time Team episode at Oakham Castle in Rutland back in 2012, and the excavation from Time Team actually featured in Matthew's talk on castles not so long back. And I think what that first slide shows really is the sort of scenario that you would envisage a detectorist like me interfacing with formal archaeology here, checking the spoil heaps, checking trenches perhaps, recovering metal items, coins and other things that have been missed in the excavation process, and jolly useful it can be too. And over the years, actually, I've had a number of pretty interesting and good experiences supporting more formal archaeology. Perhaps the highlight of my career so far was 10 years or so ago when for 2 summers in a row I actually went out to Italy and was the detectorist on, as I say, 2 years running, helping to support the Gabby project run by the University of Michigan on the ancient city-state of Gabby on the hills above Rome. Absolutely fascinating experience, as you can perhaps imagine, with a lot of exotic items turning up that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find in Leicestershire. There, bottom left, are the spoil heaps with my detector dwarfed by the sheer scale of the operation. There are some fascinating things turning up, and bottom right I'm nervously checking a sarcophagus with a burial in it for possible metallic grave goods. But a fantastic experience, as you can imagine. Closer to home, I played an absolutely tiny part as one of the many people who helped to support the detecting project, searching for evidence for the Bosworth battlefield. Top left, I'm sitting there surrounded by people who played a much larger role than me, and I wasn't involved at all in the sort of finale to that fantastic project, which produced a lot of the evidence, including the beautiful ball badge and the round shot that helped to define the battlefield area. But again, that I guess is a good high-profile example of metal detecting, supporting valuable archaeology and adding to our knowledge. Since I retired about 4 or 5 years ago now, I've done a fair amount of volunteering on commercial archaeology evaluations. This picture I took at an Oxford archaeology evaluation just south of Newark a couple of summers ago now, and here you're looking down on towards the end of the evaluation a very large, beautiful Bronze Age circular feature, possibly a henge or a very large barrow, intercut with a rectilinear ditch, and you can see there my detector lying in the middle of it, sort of giving you a scale there, and the small holes around the detector are where they've excavated cremation burials in lovely coloured urns. So, you know, again, a fascinating experience, and I'd like to think that the things I found certainly added to the knowledge base of those evaluations. But before I move on from this slide, it's perhaps worth making the point, which is something that occurs to me quite often, that to take this shot, I'm actually standing on the top of an extremely tall spoil heap. And that spoil heap is composed of the plough soil from this entire area that's been stripped off in a very large pile and just put to one side before the evaluation even begins. And I think it's perhaps worth making that point, because for the rest of the talk, I think every single thing that I'll be showing you and talking about has been recovered from that very same plough soil, which is often discounted. So hopefully I can put in a good word for plough soil finds. For the rest of the talk, I'll be concentrating on information that I've gathered myself from detecting alone out there on the fields of Leicestershire. I'm a fervent believer that detecting, if properly carried out, can be a force for good in terms of archaeological knowledge. But the absolute key to it all, I think, is the proper and careful recording of finds. I guess perhaps my professional background has influenced me in that. Throughout my career, I've been involved in doing scientific surveys, mapping things, recording things, interpreting data. So right from the start of my time as a detectorist, that's been drilled into me. And I've been trying to do my best to record everything as I've gone along. Times change. I think that's illustrated here by this picture, which shows the sort of thing that I find quite regularly, an absolutely appalling example of a corroded Roman coin, just emerging, having been detected from the plough soil. Give that coin another 2 years of harrowing and ploughing, exposure to the air, chemicals, that'll be gone and gone forever. And to me, that's a data point, every bit as valuable as a silver coin or something more identifiable, and just as worthy of recording. Going back to my early days, I guess the first things that I tried to record properly were in the early 1990s, when I was living in Quennemer in Leicestershire and beginning to find things out on the farmland around the village. And in those days, you took your finds along to the Jury Wall Museum. And here's a report by Bob Rutland, who's very kindly identified 3 of my finds, a shield-shaped weight, an Anglo-Saxon brooch, and a hammered coin. And that report's accompanied by a very good, very nice, beautiful line drawing by Richard Knox. And I've got myself a nice file full of Richard's drawings here as part of my archive, which I'm sure will be worth a lot of money one day. But good records and the beginning of the process. As time went by, I'd been doing my best to record find spots by map reading, but then along came GPS technology, and I seized upon that and carried a handheld GPS around with me to try and get 10-figure grid references for everything I was finding. These days, you don't even need that. A smartphone will do it. So my smartphone, I just use an app called Grid Reference, which quite happily gives you a 10-figure grid reference. And you can see here, in this case, it's claiming that it's accurate to 3 meters, which is pretty good going, I think, for finds in plough soil where things move around laterally a bit anyway. So there's really no excuse not to record find spots quite well these days, I think. As time went by, moving into the later 1990s, to try and sort of keep on top of all of my finds and my records, I, again influenced by work, I guess, put together an Access database, a Microsoft Access database, which actually is still going now, and I've got my 2,957 records now on there. And I still find this useful. I use it as a sort of clipboard for moving things onto the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and for managing all of my records and archive here at home. And these days it's cross-referenced with the Portable Antiquities Scheme records that I'll go on to in a minute. And from 2004 along came this fantastic resource, the Portable Antiquities Scheme, onto which, as time went by, I did my best, fantastically supported by Wendy Scott as my Finds Liaison Officer, to backload the records from my own database onto this scheme. In due course, I was trusted to become a self-recorder, so that I'm now loading things on there myself. As I say, Wendy was a fantastic support to me over the years in that. And now Wendy's moved on, and Megan Gard is our new Finds Liaison Officer for Leicestershire. Just to show you, that's the single record there for that wonderful corroded Roman coin that I showed you emerging from the ground a short while ago. And the Portable Antiquities Scheme has gone beyond that in being a fantastic support to detectives and recorders like myself. I'm showing you this photograph here of a Roman coin because I think it shows an early self-recorded photograph that I took, that I was quite proud of at the time. Looking back on it now, that's pretty awful. With the help of a training course run by the Plastic Explorers Project on the Portable Antiquities Scheme, I attended a photography course, and these days I'm producing things like that for my records, which for a non-photographer I'm quite happy with. I'd give myself 7 out of 10 for that one, I think. But it illustrates the sort of support that this project has been giving to people and many other detectives and people like myself. In my own case, I think the most valuable training courses that they ran were on identifying Roman coins. Sam Moorhead here, the finds advisor at the British Museum, has been absolutely fantastic in running these Roman coin courses. You get the chance to go behind a big armoured door in the coins department of the British Museum and sit down and be taken through the various classes of Roman coins. And I think I've moved up gradually to above schoolboy level on identifying coins myself, and I'm getting there slowly. But Sam running those courses was fantastic. In total, I attended, I think, 12 of these Plastic Explorers projects, and lo and behold, last week in the email, I got a certificate awarded, which takes me back to my school days and was quite a boost. You know, it's many years since I've had a certificate, so thank you for that. It goes beyond that, because Sam Moorhead from the British Museum actually was incredibly generous with his time and his expertise, and he came up to Leicestershire on no less than 4 separate occasions and sat down with Wendy Scott and myself and went through, at that time, my entire collection of Roman coins, correcting my errors. And what I've got here is a plot showing just one of my small Roman occupation sites that I've detected, a small site near Ashby Folville, from which 87 coins had turned up by that stage. And here, using my own identification, I've plotted out the frequency according to Rees periods, which is the sort of standard way of dividing up coins according to periods of the Roman occupation, largely by emperors or groups of emperors. And here you can see that I've plotted them out according to the Rees period. But on my graph here, I've got 2 bars, one called unattributed radiates and one called unattributed nummi, which is a posh way for saying radiate coins and later Roman nummi coins that I hadn't got a clue what they were. After Sam had looked at them, the blue bars are the after checking by Sam. And you can see here that the unattributed radiate column has disappeared completely and other columns have grown. And the unattributed nummi column has shrunk dramatically, and other periods, particularly period 19, the Valentinianic, has grown a lot. So the data being sharpened up, better and better data going back onto the Portable Antiquities Scheme. And I think that's one of the things that I find most rewarding, that as a self-recorder myself, you've got the chance to keep revisiting and revisiting the records and refining, making the data better and better and fit for purpose. So with that as a background, I'll move on to talking about the sort of things that I've been finding in Leicestershire. I've been detecting since 1991. I've got all of these records on the scheme. Of those 2,950 odd, 1,600 are GPS records, but the best endeavours from map reading. But taking a brief audit of what I've got, there's 30 odd Bronze Age items, 30 odd Iron Age items, a heck of a lot of Roman material, early medieval and medieval. Now, in 2019, when the made the announcement that within Leicestershire, the scheme had recorded a fantastic total of 30,000 objects. Now, at that stage, I was on 2,750, so I thought it might be instructive to compare my records, which are in the blue, with the 30,000 odd for Leicestershire. To make mine look better here, I've used a log scale, otherwise they look tiny. But I think it's quite interesting that actually the two follow quite closely. Roman records for both me and for Leicestershire are the most, then medieval, then post-medieval. So there's a fair amount of agreement there. And you could argue, therefore, that the material I've been finding is a representative sample of what you'd expect to find in Leicestershire. But of course, the devil's in the detail, and that's what I'll be concentrating on from now on. I'll spend the rest of the talk really just talking about one tiny little part of Leicestershire. There's Leicester in the centre, and the area I'll be talking about is just a little rectangle in the River Reek Valley to the northeast of Leicester, between Leicester and Melton Mowbray, a valley smallholding, a valley landholding. And the way that this came about actually for me was we were living in the Reek Valley back at around the turn of the millennium, around 2000. And we used to go from time to time to a very nice pub in the village of Hoby, which looks down over the valley, and they've got a smashing beer garden where you can peer out over the countryside and down towards the river. And I sat there and thinking, look at that beautiful countryside. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could get permission to detect on some of that? And to an act of supreme courage, because I am a complete coward when it comes to knocking on farm doors, I found myself with permission to detect on quite a significant part of the map, covering that part of the world within the River Reek Valley, centred near the village of Frisby on the Reek, which is top centre there, and with Rotherby towards the west of that map. Now, I gave a version of this talk last summer to the past Explorers Portable Antiquities Scheme conference at the British Museum, which was being organised and chaired partly by Helen Geek. And in talking about what I was going to say, she said, as a detectorist, how do you decide what sampling unit you're going to sample with your metal detector? So, for example, are you just looking at a parish? And I thought this was quite interesting because it sort of demonstrates the difference between the perhaps idealised, slightly scientific world of archaeology, where you can pick and choose exactly where you go, and the much more pragmatic, practical constraints that a detector is under. So, for example, those are the parish boundaries there, with the parish of Frisby on the Reek. And it would be lovely to say, I'm just going to sample that parish. But, you know, good luck approaching all of the landowners and getting permission for everything. That would almost be an impossibility as a detectorist. As a biologist, perhaps carrying out surveys from a scientific point of view, perhaps if you were doing a vegetation survey on a meadow, or perhaps looking at wildlife in rock pools on a beach, you might deploy a quadrat, and so perhaps a 1 metre square quadrat out. And here I've thrown a 1 kilometre square quadrat onto the map. And again, that's a sampling unit that you might want to deploy. And I actually will deploy this later in the talk because it's quite useful. But again, as a detectorist, you wouldn't stop dead on the margins of that. The reality actually is a lot messier. In the end, that's the sampling unit that I ended up with. You end up, once you've got permission from the landowner, with the magical moment where you sit down in the farm kitchen with a highlighter pen and a map, and you're told where you can go and where you can't go, and what the constraints are, and where you'll be trusted, and where not to cross over a boundary. This is real life. It's untidy, but it's a sampling unit nonetheless. I'd hope to demonstrate from the finds that I'll show you within this area from now on that it can be valid. Obviously, you're going to be criticised in terms of sampling what's there, because people will say, okay, you've found things, but what about the absences? And all I can say in my defence is I've been detecting this area now for 20 years, partly because of my cowardice in approaching landowners. I've really stuck doggedly to this area, which means that I've spent a lot of time on the totally unproductive bits of it. When I go home and tell my wife that I found nothing at all, my defence is I've been proving a negative, proving that the empty bits of this area are as significant as the bits where material turns up in good quantities. Although obviously you are open to the criticism that as a detectorist you will spend more time on the productive areas. And what I'll do from now on then, for the rest of the talk, is begin to go through, in order of period really, on the sort of things that have turned up. And I'll start with flint and stone tools, clearly not metal detected, but I think I've got myself a fairly good eye for spotting work flint and stone tools. I'm not so good at identification. I've been on a course, and when I'm totally retired and got loads more time on my hand, I'll refine my lithic implement records better. But some nice things have turned up. I found 2 nice Neolithic hand axes, one a polished flint hand axe, one made of Langdale stone, and down the right there's a nice leaf-shaped arrowhead. So nice things have turned up. But actually, you can see straight away, I think, over towards the west of the area, near the village of Rotherby there, there's a very clear concentration of material, with a lot of flakes, blade-like flakes, cores, scrapers, a whole lot of material, with quite a meaningful concentration there, I think, and probably with material that better people than myself have identified, going through certainly from Mesolithic, edging through Neolithic, and edging into the early Bronze Age. Moving on into the Bronze Age itself, and now we are talking about metal items that I've detected. There's a reasonable scatter of Bronze Age items that have turned up along this linear landholding. Nothing that would suggest any great concentration or centre of activity. For example, I've got myself part of a bronze axe, which is quite nice. I always wanted to find myself a bronze socketed axe. That still eluded me, but I was very surprisingly, what did turn up one day and unexpectedly was this, which is actually a socketed axe made, would you believe, in iron, but completely copying the bronze form. And this turned out to be quite significant. I believe it's only the second one like this that's turned up in the British Isles, and it dates from the absolute Bronze Age to Iron Age transition. I mean, I think of that as completely the wrong way to make an iron axe if you're going to make something useful. But it probably about 800 to 600 BC, but slightly difficult to date, and quite a significant find nationally. But it speaks, I guess, to the fact that here you're seeing the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age in this part of the world. And when you move into metal material from the Iron Age, the numbers of items that are recovered begin to creep up. And just to bring your attention to it, from now on, when I show a round dot on a map, that's a coin, and a square dot is an artifact that's not a coin. But here's Iron Age material. And now I think, unlike the stone implements I showed you near Rotherby, you're beginning to see a very clear concentration of activity over towards the east of the map. So I thought it would, and including some very, very nice things. I mean, here's a menagerie of 3 beautiful zoomorphic items that have turned up. The one on the left is a lovely bull's head mount with glass eyes. We're not 100% sure what it is. Somebody suggested it might have been mounted onto the tip of a drinking horn or something like that. It's complete speculation, I think. The one in the middle is some kind of bucket mount or container mount, again in the form of a bull's head. And then on the right, you've got what we're pretty certain is a little tiny boar's head with a lip on the back to fit on over something again. So some beautiful things. But going back to the map again now, I think you can now see for the first time the suggestion of a concentration of activity. And this is where I think it's perhaps valid to deploy the 1 meter square quadrat and concentrate now on this part of the world, which I'll do for the next few slides. Here we're now talking about an area of intensively farmed arable farmland on the higher ground above the valley. So here you're looking north with the river valley and Ashfordby in the distance there, but unremarkable farmland, very little in the way of stone material there. But as I say, the beginnings of quite a number of Iron Age coins and artifacts turning up. And Peter Liddell passed on to me some field walking data that I believe was led by Nick Cooper. And there's the comparison there of field walking pottery, Iron Age pottery data with the metallic finds, just for the one field that was field walked. And you can see, I think, a pretty good correspondence, suggesting probably Iron Age settlement and activity. And certainly I see a lot of Iron Age pottery around there. Talking firstly about the Iron Age coins, here what I've done again is to return to this idea of plotting out coins in total numbers by their Rees period. And I'm starting the graph here by talking about Iron Age coins, for which within this 1 kilometre square I've turned up 5 so far. There are 4 examples of them. The top 2 and the bottom left, those 3 are all silver units of our local Coriol Tauri tribe. The one bottom right, sadly, was the moment when I thought I'd found myself a gold coin, a gold stater. That one turns out to be a forgery, actually. It's a plated forgery from Avantes, not our local people at all. But these silver units are beautiful things. Here you've got the horse and perhaps a wheel or something like that, and a beautiful little boar on the back. Wonderful little coins. As you move on next, from the Iron Age, you're edging into the first Roman coins that turn up. And on this area, I've turned up 2 Roman Republican coins so far. Here's one of them. It's a Republican Denarius, which is in a pretty appalling condition, but actually this is what it should look like. And it's a coin of Brutus, as in one of Caesar's most famous assassin. And here what it's showing on the reverse is apparently Brutus marching from right to left with 2 of his lictors either side of him, I think sort of as his security guys. And apparently this is the first of this coin type that turned up in England when Sam Moore had looked at it. But these 2 Republican coins sort of raise an issue about the transition between Iron Age and Roman coinage, because I didn't realise it until I was told it. But apparently, in Iron Age times, we weren't mining silver here, and we'd not got really access to good silver working. They were very good with gold and perhaps copper alloy, but it was only when silver Roman coinage like this started coming across, when the Romans were in Gaul, I guess, in the middle of the 1st century BC. And these coins started becoming widely available. There was suddenly an explosion of the little silver Iron Age coins that I've just shown you. So it raises the question, what are these Republican denarii doing here? Are they old, almost like heirloom pieces that from the middle 1st century BC that came over after the invasion, or are they almost bullion or trading coins that have come across during the Iron Age period? And I was interested in the talk about the Hallerton treasure, that one of the ingots that turned up there was actually partly composed at least of melted down silver coins. So it begs that question about the transition between the Iron Age and the Roman coinage. But when you then move into the Roman period itself, so edging from the Iron Age into the Roman period, from this one period, 2 very early post-invasion coins have turned up. This is a semis from the Claudian period, dated 41 to 54. And according to some, this could very well have been a copied coin actually made in a legionary fortress by soldiers sort of during the invasion process. So it speaks to there's a presence of Roman coinage from the very earliest part of the occupation here in this area. And then if you sort of sit back and look at the rest of the Roman period, this area, and look at the Reece period, throughout the whole occupation almost, the frequency of coins increases dramatically, and lots and lots of Roman coins from this one area. And if you plot them out onto those fields, obviously you've got a very dense concentration of coin losses, pointing, you would imagine, towards Roman settlement. And again, the field walking data that was passed on to me by Peter echoes that, with a very good correspondence between pottery and the plotting of the coins on the one field of the field walk. And Peter, in one of his talks, sort of alluded to the possibility of this being almost a Roman town, and I don't think that's stretching it too far. It's a good sizable settlement. I thought for the next couple of slides I'd delve a little bit deeper into the coinage from these fields, from this one area. And to try and simplify things, what I've done is to split them into early, middle and late coins. By the early coins, I'm referring to these Augustan period up to 250. It's worth a slight digression now just to actually look at a couple of these, because they're quite interesting. The 2 in the middle are especially significant. The one on the left is a Denarius of Otho, who was only around for a few months in, I think, 69, immediately after Nero. So that's a pretty rare coin. And the coin middle right is a Civil Wars denarius, which again, from the Civil Wars just before Nero went off the scene. And this was minted by a chap called Vindex in Gaul. And this particular coin has been flagged up on the system as a coin of national importance because it's so rare. And you think, how on earth did these things make it to a little field in Leicestershire? Bottom right, that's a beautiful denarius of Trajan, or you'd think so when you looked at this side, but when you see the back and you see it beginning to erode and the copper alloy coming out from the hole in the centre, you suddenly realise you're dealing with another forgery. And you take your hat off to the chap who forged that coin. They're pretty impressive. I'm digressing. These are the earlier group of coins from that field. And when you plot them, there they are, a good concentration centred around that occupation site. The middle period coins, are the radiates. Every one of these has got the emperor with a radiate crown, a whole selection of different rulers there. Towards the centre right there, you've got a nice example of a barbarous radiate, a barbarous copy of a coin with a much cruder bust than the rest of them. But there you've got Carausius and his Chancellor Electus there. But all of these, the middle period coins with radiate crowns, and add those to the mix, it just adds to the total concentration. Move on to the later period, the smaller copper alloy nummi. Most of these are Constantinian coins. Add those to the mix, and again, everything gets much more concentrated and adds to the impression of a dense lot of coins. But you can look at these in a slightly different way, and here I've done a heat map. Some people refer to these as measles maps of the coin losses here, from early to middle and late. And here are the earlier coins with the denser blobs corresponding to the denser occurrence of coins from this period. So there's the early, then the middle, and then the late. And I think it's worth replaying that again, because I think if you look at the earlier coin losses, they're more concentrated towards the west and the centre of the site. The radiate coins, a shrinkage towards the centre of the area, I think. And then the later coin losses are moved more towards the northeast of the area. And whether that reflects some pattern in coin losses, or you could speculate a change in the settlement pattern and the distribution of the dwellings and the settlement over that period, you couldn't answer that without proper excavation or geophysics or something like that. But I think that's got to be a valuable insight from recording the fine spots of those coins properly, I think. But you'll see on this particular last map, I've used the phrase later rather than late for these nummi, and I've dated these at 296 to 364. And I've done that advisedly because I think when you now look at the very late coinage from after 364 to 402, which is about as late as you can find coins in England, something quite dramatic happens. The number of coins plummets down to just 3. Something weird is going on. And if you do a Reese period plot here for this site, only those 3 coins after 364. And the question, of course, is why. And I subtitled the talk "Question from the Past," so I guess this is question 1. What on earth is going on here on the Roman occupation site? Why does the coinage suddenly almost stop dead after 364? And I think this is a significant question to ask. The coins you're talking about that are not there are mostly these Valentinianic coins from 364 to 378 from Greece period 19. Here are 3 examples of coins that I found: Valentinian I and Valens and Gratian. And these are not uncommon coins. I did a trawl through my database, and I've got 164 of them in my collection, so they're not rare. And if you look again at that plot I've just shown you from this site near Frisby, there they are with hardly any. Compare that to Leicestershire as a whole, and this is a trawl from the Portable Antiquities Scheme. A good representation of period 19 coins and beyond. 2 sites that I've looked at myself and detected. This is Pernometum Roman town near Wimeswold. Again, plenty of period 19 coins, and a little site near Barkby Thorpe, where actually period 19 coins dominate them. So in Leicestershire and around, there are plenty of these coins, but not in this one part of the world. So something is happening. And that, I think, is a valid question to leave there for people above my pay grade to address and to answer in the future. And when you now zoom back out from that quadrat to the valley as a whole, there are all the Roman coins. There are the coins from period 19, hardly any. And if you then go beyond that, beyond 378, no Roman coins from those periods at all that I've found. I mean, it doesn't say they're not there, but something really does seem to have altered. And being slightly dramatic about it, as we move from the Roman period towards the Dark Ages, it's tempting to say that perhaps in this small part of the world the lights dimmed slightly early as we move towards the Dark Ages. In terms of metal finds, the lights come on again with the occurrence of early medieval material. And here is my plot again of early medieval coins and artifacts. And now you can see that the focus has shifted completely. We've again moved totally over towards the west, and deploying the quadrat again, you're concentrating on an area just north of the village of Rotherby. And this is Anglo-Saxon material that has turned up over the years on 3 fields, field 1, field 2 and field 3, just north of the village of Rotherby. Now, this has been quite an interesting long-term story for me. I mean, my very first find from one of these fields was back in 2002, when I found part of a small long brooch. I thought, yippee, perhaps I'm onto an Anglo-Saxon site here. It took me 2 years to find another Anglo-Saxon fragment. And it's taken me until 2019, so 17 years it's taken me to get up to 48 finds. So it's a slow burn process, but bit by bit the story's starting to come together now. And there's a selection of the Anglo-Saxon material that's turned up over the years. Not quite up to date, that's up to last year. I've got a few more now. And hopefully you can see the photography getting slightly better over the years as I've gone on. There have been some interesting and nice things have turned up. So, for example, top left there, that I misidentified as a saucer brooch, but it actually turns out to be the gilded centre of a shield boss. Top right, you've got a beautiful little gilded copper alloy mount with a coiled serpent. And you can see the little serpent's head down there, bottom right, a beautiful little thing. Bottom left is the part of a floyd cruciform brooch which would have been a magnificent thing when it was entire, but that's just one arm of a very large brooch with 2 opposed predatory birds' heads either side, looking quite evocative, I think. And bottom right is a horse's head terminal from a cruciform brooch, with the horse's eyes here and nostrils. And the interesting thing about this one, it turned out to be quite unusual in that it's got a hole bored through it. And this Helen Geek seized on an article on one of the blogs on the Portable Antiquities Scheme, talking about this particular object, which was identified as possible a klapperschmuck, which is a type of cruciform brooch which would have had some kind of pendant suspended from that hole through the horse's nostrils. So an interesting thing. One of the fields was actually field walk by a local history group, but this summer I've been privileged to be joined by, on occasions when I've been out there, actually coming along with me, by one of the best field workers in the business, Richard Knox, who lives locally and has got an absolutely dead eye for Anglo-Saxon pottery. And he's been deploying a similar technique to myself, actually picking up individual sherds and recording the grid references, which have, on the 2 fields that have been walked, the bottom field hasn't been looked at in this way yet, a good concentration of Anglo-Saxon pottery sherds corresponding nicely with metal artifacts, so reinforcing the idea of a concentrated area of activity. And if you separate the Anglo-Saxon material out into earlier and middle and later, looking at the earlier material first, which is by far the most frequent, you can see a good scatter across the 3 fields and perhaps some clues towards concentration. If you do a heat map of it, you get areas with more concentrated material. And almost the knee-jerk reaction, I think, in many cases, is to say, well, you must have a cemetery there, a plowed-out cemetery. And perhaps that's where it is. This may be true. We'll never know without excavation or geophysics. And I sincerely hope that these beautiful fields are never built on and never require too much in that sort of way. But I've spent many, many hours standing on these fields wondering what's happening around here. Okay, and that concentrated area might reflect that, or it might be simply because it's the highest part of the field which has been degraded most by ploughing, most material that has come up into detectable range. You can't be sure. I would, for question 2, from question from the past, I would leave this as an open question for what's going on this little bit of landscape. And I'll take that a bit further by now. Well, actually, yes, and it's worth saying here in the context of, is this a cemetery site or not? Again, Helen Geek on that blog said that the sort of brooches that are making a large proportion of this assemblage here are actually more common as metal detector finds than they are in graves, suggesting they were being worn and lost before burnished burials caught on. So I think you need to keep an open mind. And to illustrate that real life is often more complex than you might expect, I'll now go off on a complete tangent from the Anglo-Saxon period, in that on these fields, I've been finding quite a number of copper alloy items that are almost certainly bits of casting waste, or certainly molten material. I've got no agenda in recording this material, thinking what period it might be from, and clearly some of it could be anything from very, very old Bronze Age up to much more recent. There are blobs of copper alloy. There are other things which appear to have casting screws on them and seem to be evidence of things poured into mould. So evidence perhaps of, and it's only really when I plotted these out that I was struck by the apparent coincidence of the casting waste with the metallic items, but up here more on a high ground, not down in this lower field. So a suggestion perhaps that there's a correspondence between this casting waste and the Anglo-Saxon material, although you can never, of course, prove that because you can't locate the casting waste. And where it gets a little bit more interesting still and takes you into the grounds of completely unfounded speculation is that one of the things that turned up amongst the casting waste was this, which is a little blob of gold. My wife immediately christened this as the gold bean, and since then the field I found it on has been known as the gold bean field. But it's a blob of casting waste, which I declared as potential treasure, but was returned because it was undateable. It could be any age from Bronze Age onwards, but it was right in the middle of that scatter that may or may not be associated with the Anglo-Saxon material. And to carry a flight of fancy on even further, with apologies to Wendy, who's had a lot of involvement with these, in the local area, 2 of these beautiful Anglo-Saxon gold bracteate pendants have turned up. The first one on the top from Scolford, which Wendy's done an excellent paper on in the Leicestershire Fieldworkers Medieval Leicestershire volume. And down below, a slightly more fragmentary bracteate with very similar appearance from the self-same parish that I'm talking about, without breaking any confidentialities about find spots. It's relevant to the area that I'm talking about. And on one of the entries for the lower bracteate on the Portable Antiquities Scheme, there's this statement there that there's an idea that these bracteates may have been locally produced. So I'm here on the complete flight of fancy here that there may be some evidence for metalworking, and who knows, somewhere within this area with blobs of gold and perhaps locally produced items, this sort of thing is going on. But that's a complete flight of fancy, but hey, I'm a biologist, not an archaeologist, so I'll retreat from that now. moving on from the early Anglo-Saxon period to the later, to the middle period artifacts. And here I found two coins which date to around about the turn of the 600s to the 700s, and two artifacts included in this pin. You begin to get a suggestion perhaps that the material is migrating away towards the west and closer towards the village of Rotherby. And then with the later Anglo-Saxon material, step-ends in particular, again, quite a marked concentration towards the village. And you begin to wonder, is this some sort of evidence of shifting activity and settlement throughout that period towards the area where the current village is? So that's of interest. And when you now deploy a much smaller quadrat to look at this one field in particular and do a version of a Reese period plot that extended much after the Roman period, here's the coin profile for this one little field, and you've got the Anglo-Saxon signature there because I found this beautiful primary shatter Anglo-Saxon coin. A bit like the Bactriates here, echoing earlier Roman influences with the echoes of a Roman standard on the back and the echoes of a Roman bust perhaps in profile there with the diadem, but runes on this one, a beautiful little thing. So a lovely little Anglo-Saxon coin. But actually that's outnumbered by these two bars here, which are the main coin signatures for the field, which are medieval silver coins, in particular pennies of Henry III and Edward I to Edward III. So a real increase in medieval evidence. And if you plot the medieval coinage alongside the later Anglo-Saxon material, you get this pretty clear signature of activity coalescing towards the current village. And in a sense, that takes me full circle, because this has brought us back to that self-same field where I showed you the work flint tools turning up from near the village of Rotherby. And this is the field in question with Rotherby Church behind there. And trust me, I didn't pose this one. The field walkers amongst you may spot the flint core just sitting there in plain view on the field. As I say, it takes me full circle back to the earliest find from this area. And in a sense, it takes me full circle again, because back in 2000, sitting in that pub garden, this was the very area that I was looking longingly down on and wishing that I'd got permission to detect on. So I revisited that self-same pub garden last summer to take this photograph for the talk, and it would seem rude not to raise a glass of local refreshment to toast the ploughed fields of Leicestershire and the information that hopefully they can bring to archaeology. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was a very, very entertaining and enlightening talk. Some questions have been asked, and if you're happy,
Yes.
we'll go through them. Lovely. So I think Wendy Scott wanted you to be clear and not to be modest that you were the first self-recorder of the Portable Antiquities Scheme.
No, of course not.
So blow your own trumpet. And then, secondly, Patrick Boylan wanted to make the observation of why detecting got such a bad name in the 1970s and early 80s across East Anglia and Eastern England due to American Air Force personnel going out detecting without permission, and then finds actually leaving the UK on military transport, and how the Museums Association and CBA representatives had confronted the military authorities who were unaware of this activity and quickly stamped it down. and particularly clamped down on the use of military transport. And Patrick remembers weekly raiding parties, I guess when the Rutland Reservoir, Emping Reservoir, Rutland Water, was under construction. So yes, I guess metal detecting had a lot to do to actually get away from those bad days. Have you got any kind of comment on that?
Well, only that I think, again, to pay tribute to the Portable Antiquities Scheme and the tremendous sort of ambassadorial work that the FIS liaison officers have done in approaching metal detecting clubs and detectors, you know, the vast majority of whom are totally sound and got a real interest in history and getting stuff recorded. But often you need to suddenly switch this light bulb on that actually the significance of things comes in the recording.
Yes. Yes.
And certainly Sam Moore had said in giving talks that, you know, totally conscientious, responsible detectives who have been quite happily collecting perhaps a tin full of Roman coins over the years have suddenly realised the error of the ways in that find spots haven't been recorded properly, and sort of, oh no, what have I been missing all of these years?
Yes.
You've got, I think you've got to look at detectives as a spectrum. You know, clearly at one end you've got the undesirable element. Sadly, I mean, everybody who's got a shotgun license isn't a poacher.
Sure.
Over at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps you've got complete anoraks like me who will obsessively record everything.
Yes. Yes.
But
Yes.
in the middle, you've got this vast majority of totally sound, honest people
Yes.
who are a tremendous resource in recording vast numbers of
Yes.
data points, which on the Portable Antiquities Scheme now, which I think is now between 1.5 and 2 million finds, is an enormous resource for research. And even when the data isn't as granular as mine, when perhaps it's just going down to parish level, it's still an enormous resource.
Yes. Yes. Well, I do. I mean, from
you've only got to see somebody as the insights that brings.
I was going to say, from the perspective of commercial archaeology, routine close transect detecting of sites doesn't happen prior to soil strips, not routinely, and there's a lot of information that is stripped off when we go to excavate, that would actually, you know, there is so much information in those artifacts, and we I don't think we've quite got it right how we approach that, really.
I mean, if I could just give a brief example of that, one of the sites where I was volunteering on one of those stripped areas, they were openly talking about the possibility of civil war activity there, and actually right next to an area that was a Roman kiln, I suddenly found a really dense concentration of musket balls. And any detectorist knows that musket balls cheerfully circulate in the plough soil. And I guess what I was only seeing was a few that had managed to make it through the soil that had been stripped off and thrown away, and were right down there in the lower layers.
Yes.
And there was a sort of slight look of panic about, oh my God, what have we thrown away? You know, before we even started looking at this site.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so another question for you from Christopher Sim. Would you say that quantity wins over quality in terms of using metal detectors for archaeological work? Or have you ever found a single object that can reveal a story of its own?
Okay. Well, the gold beans got me thinking quite a lot.
Yes.
And it's the unexpected things, yes. I mean, that Civil War. No, actually, I'll backtrack slightly. When I first started with my first cheap metal detector, I got permission on our local village park from the parish council, and I turned up a printing plate, a small brass square, which when you looked at it had the ghostly image of a First World War soldier on it. And it was almost certainly an image from an obituary in the local paper. And we spent, as a village, about a year trying to track this chap down, and we've still not managed to do it. But
right.
He haunts me because my granddad was in the First World War and survived it, and he looks like my granddad, and this face still haunts me now, and I still want to track him down. So it's the unexpected things that you don't quite know about.
Yes, yes, okay. Thank you. So from Jonathan Smith, interestingly, I was the finder of the gold noble coin at Codnor Castle. However, it was It was a decorated spindle wall that excited Helen Geek, as it would enable her to date more accurately many which had been presented to her as a finds liaison officer.
I'll always remember that episode from Connor Castle and seeing your hand shaking, holding that gold coin in your hand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, here are some different sorts of questions. There's 3 in 1 here. What was the grid reference? Are there any good resources for taking good artifact photos? And lastly, is your Access database available?
Oh, crikey. Yeah, well, my email address is there. I can happily send out a stripped down version of the Access database. I mean, it is...
Well, there you go. That's very good of you.
It is a very sort of held together with bits of string and sellotape, and I can strip my data out and send it, but you know, I bear no responsibility for the state of it. Sorry, what was the first part of the question again?
The first one was, what was the name? And sorry, this is from Andy Brown. What was the grid reference app?
Okay, literally just called Grid Reference.
Okay.
Just go on to the Google Play or whatever it is, and just search for an app called Grid Reference, and it's free. As long as you've got location turned onto your phone, it seems to work well for me. And on my phone, actually, it links to another app that I didn't know I'd got called Notepad. So you get your Grid Reference, then just press a little icon, and it copies it across into it, and you make a note of what you've just found there, so you don't even need a pen and paper.
Very handy. Very handy. And then the third one in there was resources for taking good artifact photos. So what have you found has helped you get good photos?
The key to me was the software that we were shown on the course. I think it's paint.net. I may be wrong there, Wendy might correct me, which is a free version of free open source software that almost, I mean, originally I think it started off as a sort of free stripped down version, a bit like Photoshop, but actually it's almost as good now. And with a very little bit of training, you can get you know, good backgrounds and correct your photographs nicely on that. I'm an appalling amateur, just using a point and click small digital camera, and when I went in the course, you know, I was shamed by the kit that some people have got, but you can do a reasonable job with that software and a pretty run-of-the-mill camera, I think.
Okay, thank you. There's a question about how this talk can be re-shown, and it is being recorded and it will be put up on the Facebook page of the Leicestershire Archaeological and Historical Society. So if you just watch your feeds or whatever, it will come up there. Many people saying thanks very much for such an interesting talk. And yeah, from Wendy, a great talk, Phil, wonderful illustration of what concentrated and well-recorded detecting can add to our knowledge. And also for Wendy, a nice nostalgia trip for me, as she remembers photographing most of the finds illustrated that you brought to her. So that's nice.
And thanks for your support.
Okay, and a couple of questions here. How often do you still go out detecting, and what sort of area do you try to cover? This is from Freddie Delisle. What sort of area do you try and cover when you go out?
I get out as often as I can. Obviously not at the moment. With lockdown, I think possibly as often as my wife would put up with me. Probably twice a week. These days, with my advancing age, I find I'm more limited by stamina than now. In the old days, I'd be out there all day. Now, I think after about 3 hours, things are starting to creak. And you get smarter as you go on. I'm very fortunate in that my main landowner allows me to go on when the crops are sown, and you know when the technology and the ground conditions and the disturbance of the ground maximises your chances. So, you know, I think I've got better and more targeted as time's gone by. But the other thing actually is that in the area that I've been showing, the return per unit effort is getting less and less and less each year, because with modern agriculture, it's minimal cultivation. There's very little deep ploughing goes on these days. It's just too expensive. And in archaeological terms, I find that it's frustrating for detectives, but it's quite comforting because there's still untold amounts of material safely tucked away below the disturbance level, which isn't coming up into the area where it's just going to turn to dust.
Yes. Okay. Do you have any problems with nighthawkers? There's a question from Andy L. Do you have problems with nighthawkers, and how do you deal with it?
I've been fortunate. I've certainly encountered it. I remember once at Burnham Eton Roman Town where I had permission there. There was a chap there quite cynically, he was like the human shadow in camouflage gear, sneaking about it. If I took a step to the right, he took 2 steps to the right, and I just find it heartbreaking that there are people prepared to do that and besmirch the good name of I call it a hobby, but of metal detecting. The area where I've been working, fortunately not. And in all honesty, I can go out there now for 4 hours at a time, and I'm lucky if I come back with 1 corroded Roman coin. So it must be much, much worse in highly productive areas, perhaps further south, where perhaps Iron Age coinage or somewhere around Hallerton or somewhere like that turns up. But perhaps I'm naive, but I've been lucky so far in that it's not really. And I live in fear of the day where perhaps I might end up getting thrown off my permission because some fool is just to spoil things for everybody.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Tracy's iPad has asked, what do you use to plot your finds? How do you do
yes,
that?
Quantum GIS, which again is an open source program. You can just download it for free from the internet. I may have been slightly naughty in that some of the source maps that I'm using as background OS maps may or may not possibly have had something to do with my working life, but actually these days you can get hold of the maps as well on which to plot your finds, and it's a matter of sitting down there and playing with it. If you've got your finds and your good references and your spots plotted out on an Excel spreadsheet and you convert that to a .csv file, you can drop that directly into Quantum GIS and the dots appear almost as by magic. A couple of frustrating days playing with it and you can be up and running, plotting things out on that. And if you end up getting nowhere with it, go onto YouTube. There are dozens of differing quality videos that will get you past whatever logjam you've got yourself in. So, for example, with the heat mapping, I got nowhere with that till I watched an American guy doing a heat map of New York, and suddenly I got it.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. There's so much you can learn, and it's brilliant that so many people are so willing to share what they know and put time into actually making a resource available for people. I think that always, I'm always really pleased to find that stuff. So that's very good of them.
That was the one course that I wish the Past Explorers project had had time to do on GIS plotting, but sadly I think the project ran out of funding and ended before they managed to do that.
Yes, yes. A comment from Patrick Boylan on how it was pretty controversial that at first Norwich Castle Museum started speaking to local detectorists, and gradually that spread, and out of that the Portable Antiquities Scheme developed, and that was which is why we've got to a much better place that we are in now. So thanks for that, Patrick. A question from Dave Middleton, this is about, I did a talk on LiDAR last night, which had got a lot of GIS in it, and David's asking, would LiDAR, having seen your coins and your artifacts distribution spreads in GIS, how could you combine that with LiDAR? Well, absolutely, you could use that to understand the topography of where the artifact scatters are, and and even potentially possibly find earthworks, or although if it's heavily ploughed, then not. But yes, definitely those, you know, combining the information with each other is what is, you know, is when you do suddenly start to make more leaps too.
Yes, with my Environment Agency heritage, actually, a lot of the LiDAR data came out of Environment Agency flood mapping, and over the last year or so, I've managed to crack in and download LiDAR plots for all of the areas where I've got permission to detect, and almost without exception, every single field that I look at is flat as a pancake with no diagnostic features at all.
Yes,
I think
yes.
many years of ploughing have flattened everything out suddenly. But I live in hope.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a question here from, you know, it's not all good, from Diane Johnston, that her Flo, her Finds Liaison Officer, she's not getting answers, and that a small club is trying to engage, and not, you know, it's not going in the right direction. So perhaps that's something that we can try and help with. I don't know, Phil, perhaps I don't know, a private email might help there, or if you could forward it on, Diane, because it would be good to get people helping. I think Wendy's actually answered here, saying that there are issues in Cumbria and lack of resources.
I mean, I'm sure that's the case. No, I mean, I steer clear of things like Detectors forums and things on Facebook and things like that. But I've looked at a Facebook group recently called Treasure Finds UK, and you can see this sort of spectrum of attitudes in there, from people who've reported treasure items and had fantastic support from the finds liaison officers, to others who sort of expressed frustration that things have taken a year or so, and I don't know why people bother reporting and things like that. But all I can say in my experience, that this scheme has been absolutely fantastic, and the FLOs have been so supportive. But like everybody else, everybody's under pressure, and things take time, especially at the moment.
Okay. So perhaps just a couple more questions. Right. So go on, the one here, Phil, what's your favourite find?
Oh gosh. Right, I didn't.
Sorry, from Jonathan Smith. Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes I give a talk and you finish off with the best thing I've ever found. Wendy will remember this. My wife and we went on a holiday to northern France. I think it was 2004. I may have got the year wrong. Walking on a beach near Boulogne in a rock pool. Through my wife, I've got to say this, we simultaneously spotted this thing in a rock pool, a little tiny gold bangle. And I said, that's a Bronze Age gold item. And Sue said, no. And it turned out to be a beautiful little 4,000-year-old Bronze Age, like a small bracelet in perfect condition. What do you do when you find something like that on a beach in France, knowing what you know about the treasure process and the Portable Antiquities Scheme? We elected to possibly illegally bring it back to England in my glasses case, and I, after photographing it and showing it to the family, reported that to Wendy as if it had been a treasure find here, and it eventually made its way back to France. And 6 years later, with a lot of French correspondence and bureaucracy, we eventually received a small reward from it. But it's the most perfect, wonderful item I've ever found, and an incredibly interesting, complicated story in its own right. But I'm so happy that again, in terms of the information that brings, it's a piece of data for France. But who knows? Again, you see the contrast in approaches. I don't even know where it is in France at the moment. It may possibly be displayed in Boulogne Museum at the moment, but nobody's answering the wonderful French emails that I sent.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And with that, we'll end the talk. So, on behalf of everyone, thank you ever so much for such a interesting talk and for answering so many questions so fully. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming along.